I learned early on that dinner wasn't really about food in our house. It was about Roy's rules. My name is Claire. I'm 12 years old, and I live on my stepdad's apple orchard in central Pennsylvania. My mom, Laurel, says it's a good life for a girl, but I don't see it. Most nights, I just try to survive dinner. Roy calls them harvest portions, the kind of plates he says real farm families eat. Piles of meat, potatoes slick with gravy, and vegetables boiled until they collapse. He sets them down like he's serving soldiers. A plate left unfinished, he says, tapping the table with his finger, means wasted work. And wasted work costs money. Eat it or pay for it. I hate dinner. Not because I'm picky, but because I can't handle certain textures. Mashed potatoes feel like glue in my mouth. The stringy meat makes me gag. My mom used to tell him about my autism and that I wasn't being bratty. She tried to explain, but he only laughed. Every kid these days thinks they're special, he said. Out here, we eat what's on our plate or we work it off. The first time I couldn't finish, he pulled a notepad out of his shirt pocket. Damage ledger, he called it. He wrote down how much food I'd wasted and said I'd pay him back in chores or money from my inheritance, the money my dad left me when he died. Mom looked like she wanted to speak up, but she didn't. That was the night Roy threatened to kick us out if she undermined his farm rules. Now every bite feels like a test. I sit at the table long after everyone's done, cold food staring at me like a punishment. If I gag or spit something out, Roy smirks and adds another line to his ledger. You owe me $2 for that bite, he said last week when I vomited after a mouthful of greasy pork. He made me mop the floor afterward. Claire, just eat slowly. My mom whispers sometimes, her voice trembling, but she never pushes him. She used to once. I still remember the night she snapped, saying, "She's a child, Roy, not a farmhand." He slammed his fork down and told her, "You can pack your bags if you don't like how I run this place. Don't expect my money when you leave." After that, she stopped trying. Roy likes to say he's teaching me discipline, but it feels more like punishment. He doesn't see a girl who struggles. He sees a brat wasting food. Every dinner, I count the bites like coins, knowing every leftover bite is another fine. The ledger sits on the counter, a growing stack of my debts. Last night, I stared at a plate of beef stew, trying not to gag. Roy leaned back in his chair, sipping his sweet tea. "You want to be part of this family?" he asked. "Then you learn the harvest rule. Eat or pay." I wanted to scream that I wasn't part of his family, but I didn't. Instead, I chewed, swallowed, and prayed I wouldn't throw up, because in this house, even that has a price. The night everything got worse started with one bad bite of stew. Roy had invited 2 men from town to dinner, both of them possible buyers for his cider barrels. He wanted to show off the family life on the orchard. So Mom wore a pressed blouse and I was told to act like a polite little farm girl. I sat at the table with my plate piled higher than ever, beef chunks, potatoes, and thick brown gravy that smelled like wet metal. "Eat like a farmhand, Claire," Roy said, grinning at his guests. "No picky eaters under my roof." I tried. I really did. But halfway through, the meat's texture turned my stomach. I gagged. Then before I could push back my chair, I threw up all over the floor. The room went silent. Roy's face darkened like a storm. One of the men whispered something to the other. "Get her out of here," Roy snapped at Mom. She hurried me upstairs, wiping my mouth with shaking hands. Later I heard him downstairs, still laughing with his guests but with that fake tone he uses when he's furious. By the time I came down again, they were gone, and the kitchen smelled of bleach. Roy was waiting with his ledger. "You cost me money tonight," he said, tapping his pen against the paper. "Carpet cleaning, loss of reputation, maybe even lost contracts." He scribbled numbers onto a fresh page. Carpet, $45. Lost business, $600. Embarrassment, $250. Total, $895. He pushed the paper in front of me. "That's your debt now, Claire." My chest tightened. "I don't have that," I said quietly. "Then your things will pay for it. That bike of yours? Worth $100 easy. Those books you like? Might fetch a few bucks at the flea market." His eyes shifted to my pet rabbit's enclosure. "That cage isn't cheap either." I froze. "You can't." He leaned closer, his voice low. "This is a farm. You work or you pay. That's the rule." Mom tried to intervene. "Roy, she's 12. This is too much." He shot her a look so sharp it shut her up. "You want to cover her debt? Go ahead. Otherwise, she learns the cost of waste." That week, he doubled the size of my meals. He brought out a dented kitchen scale and weighed every plate before and after dinner. "If even an ounce is left, it's 10 cents per ounce, plus labor fees for cleanup," he said. "No water until you're done. No bathroom breaks. You finish or you pay." I sat at the table, my stomach already aching, forcing bites down while the food grew cold and rubbery. I cried silently once, and he added emotional disruption fee $1 to his ledger. Mom grew quieter as the rules piled up. She stopped eating most nights, just sipping tea while staring at her lap. She's thinner now, her cheeks hollow. When I ask if she's okay, she says, I'm just tired. But I can see the fear in her eyes. By the end of that week, Roy had pinned the ledger to the wall like a trophy. This is what responsibility looks like, he said. My name was written in big letters at the top, with numbers that kept growing. The orchard doesn't feel like a home anymore. It feels like a ledger I can never escape. I started counting my own ribs in the mirror. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between one harvest portion and the next I began to shrink. After the disaster with Roy's guests, meals became worse. He piled my plate with greasy meats, boiled turnips, and things he knew I couldn't handle. You'll eat what's served, he'd say, or we'll add another line to your debt. By then, the ledger showed more than $400 of fees. I tried to find ways out. Once, I pretended to twist my ankle just before dinner, hoping to skip the meal. He caught me in the kitchen with an ice pack and laughed. Nice try. Injury fee $2. Now sit. I stopped fighting and started planning. I learned how to swallow just enough to avoid vomiting, how to hide bits of food in my napkin when he wasn't looking. At night, I'd sneak the scraps outside and bury them under the apple trees. Still, my body couldn't keep up. School became my only refuge, but even there, the cafeteria terrified me. The smell of pizza and steamed vegetables made my stomach knot. I started hiding in the library during lunch, just so I wouldn't have to eat in front of anyone. The nurse found me once, crouched behind a shelf, shaking. "Sweetheart, when's the last time you ate?" she asked, kneeling beside me. "I'm fine," I mumbled, clutching my stomach. She didn't believe me. She gave me a pack of saltine crackers and told me to keep them. That night, I slid the unopened packet under my pillow like treasure. I nibbled one cracker at a time, carefully, always after Roy was asleep. The more I hoarded, the more careful I became with every calorie. I thought of food like money. A cracker here, half a granola bar there. I stretched them across days, rationing myself so I wouldn't have to face his ledger. But Roy noticed. He noticed everything. One night, he leaned over my plate and grinned. "You think you can outsmart me? You think you can eat at school and leave this food to rot?" The next day, he made liver and onions. The smell alone made my throat tighten. He sat across from me, arms crossed. "Every gag, every cough? That's $1. Go on, princess, show me your manners." I tried to hold my breath, but halfway through, I gagged and spit a chunk back into my napkin. He wrote something down in his book, slow and deliberate. By the end of that week, I owed him over $600. My bike was already in his barn, collateral, as he called it. He started eyeing my rabbit's enclosure again, muttering, "That'll make up for the next 100. Mom barely looked at me anymore. She moved around the house like a shadow, her face pale and distant. Once I caught her staring at the ledger, her lips pressed tight, but she didn't say anything. She just walked past me like I wasn't there. I learned to live in my own head, to measure each day in bites survived, in crackers hidden, in coins of energy I could spend without breaking. I wasn't living like a kid anymore. I was surviving like someone trapped in a war no one else could see. The night he brought out the raw venison, I knew something inside him had snapped. It was fresh from the hunt, still dark red and streaked with sinew. He didn't even bother cooking it, just slapped a chunk on my plate, the juice pooling across the porcelain like blood. "Tonight," Roy said, his eyes gleaming, "you eat like a real predator. No forks. Use your hands." I froze. "I can't," I whispered. "You will," he snapped, "or you'll see what happens to kids who waste." Mom didn't look at me. She just sat there, her hands folded tight in her lap, lips pressed together like she might vanish if she stayed quiet. I tried to lift the meat, but the cold, slippery texture made my skin crawl. I gagged before it even touched my mouth. Roy leaned forward, grinning like he'd already won. "Gag fee $2, he muttered, scribbling in his ledger. "Vomit fee 10. I forced myself to take a bite. The metallic taste filled my mouth and I couldn't stop it. I vomited all over the table. Roy sighed like I'd inconvenienced him, not like I was a child shaking and sobbing in front of him. "Another 20 added for cleanup," he said calmly, as if reading off a grocery list. "Debt's climbing to 900 now. Better start thinking about which of your toys is worth pawning." His eyes drifted toward my rabbit's cage again. That night I lay awake, my heart pounding like I'd run a mile. I couldn't get the image of that raw meat out of my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Roy counting coins, his fingers greasy from handling the ledger. I felt trapped like I was drowning, except the water was thick stew, gravy and chunks pressing against my face while he laughed. I woke up screaming, my throat sore and my hands trembling. Mom came in, but all she did was sit on the edge of my bed. She didn't hug me. She didn't say anything. She just whispered, "Try to keep quiet, Claire. He's had a long day." By the next morning, my clothes hung looser on me. At school, my teacher noticed I'd lost weight. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked softly, her hand on my shoulder. I wanted to tell her everything about the ledger, the fines, the raw meat. Instead, I just nodded and said I was fine. But I guess my face told a different story because she called the school counselor. The call never made it to me. Roy intercepted it, his voice booming in the kitchen later that night. "No one calls my house about my family. You hear me, Laurel? Nobody. I hid in my room, clutching my rabbit's fur, wishing anyone, would see how bad it had gotten. Roy's pride wasn't the orchard or the cider barrels. It was the image of the perfect farm family he showed off to anyone who might do business with him. That's why, when he announced the annual community festival, I noticed the sharp edge of panic in his voice. "This year is crucial," he said, pacing the kitchen. "We'll have investors, buyers, co-op leaders. Everyone needs to see we're a happy, hardworking family. No mistakes." He looked straight at me when he said it. I remembered the last public event, the barbecue where I'd vomited after one bite of his overcooked ribs. He'd gone pale, darting around with towels, muttering, "Not here, not now." That was the first time I realized he feared embarrassment more than anything else. So I made a plan. Each night after dinner, I pretended to go to my room, but instead, I stayed in the kitchen with my phone, photographing the oversized plates and the ledger hanging on the wall. I took close-ups of the entries: gagging $2, vomit cleanup $5, emotional disruption $1. I even photographed my own weight chart, scratched on the inside of my closet door, showing how much I'd lost in 2 months. At school, I started asking questions. I sat in the library looking up child labor laws and food abuse, typing quietly so no one would see. One article said that withholding safe food or using food as punishment could be considered abuse. I printed it out and hid it in my backpack. The school computer lab became my secret workshop. I started making a simple presentation on an old PowerPoint template, how I learned about food from my stepdad. I added the photos of the plates, the ledger entries, and a picture of my rabbit's cage, the one Roy said he'd sell if I didn't pay my debt. The plan scared me, but every time I looked at my bruised tongue or remembered the raw venison, I felt a quiet fire build inside me. Mom noticed me scribbling in my notebook one night. "What are you working on?" she asked, her voice weak. "Just school stuff," I lied. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment, like she wanted to ask more, but she didn't. She rarely spoke much around Roy anymore. Meanwhile, he was busy planning the festival like it was a royal event. He polished the tractors, painted the picnic tables, and forced me into a stiff, itchy dress he said made me look farm girl sweet. He didn't know I had my own plans for that day. By the time the festival came around, my presentation was printed, 12 copies, each stapled and hidden inside my backpack. Each one started with the same sentence: "This is what discipline looks like in Roy's kitchen." For the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. The morning of the festival, Roy barked orders like a drill sergeant. "Smile, Claire. No whining. Eat what's on your plate when people are watching, or I swear." He stopped himself and straightened his tie, forcing a grin. "We're a happy family today, got it?" I nodded, my stomach tight. I'd eaten just enough dry toast to avoid passing out, but my real focus was on the papers hidden in my backpack. The orchard looked like something out of a brochure. Picnic tables covered in checkered cloths, cider barrels stacked neatly, and hay bales arranged for photo ops. Roy strutted around, shaking hands with investors, pointing out his strong family values, as Mom and I stood by, silent props in his act. When the food line opened, Roy loaded my plate with apple sausage, baked beans, and cornbread, watching me like a hawk. I took tiny bites, nodding when people glanced our way. My hands trembled as I chewed, but I forced it down. I had to look normal, at least until I made my move. Around noon, I saw Roy's boss, Mr. Harlan, arrive with his wife and a few others. They were the ones who could make or break Roy's next business deal. While he led them to the cider tasting table, I slipped a packet of my presentation from my bag. I walked up to Mrs. Harlan, who smiled kindly. "Hello, dear," she said. "Would you read this?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady. I handed her the stapled pages, how I learned about food from my stepdad. The first page showed a photo of a dinner plate larger than my head, with a note: "Failure to finish, $2 fine." Her smile faded as she flipped through the images, the ledger entries, the photos of my half-eaten meals, even a picture of my ribs sticking out under my t-shirt. "What is this?" she murmured, her voice sharp with concern. "It's true," I whispered. "He does this every day." Others started to notice her expression. She called over 2 other women, and soon a small crowd had gathered, flipping through the pages. I handed out more copies, my hands shaking but unstoppable now. When Roy turned around and saw the cluster of people, his face went pale. "What's going on here?" he demanded, striding over. Mrs. Harlan looked up, fury in her eyes. "Is this how you treat your stepdaughter? Charging her for food? Making her eat raw meat?" Roy laughed nervously. "Kids exaggerate. It's just rural discipline, a way to build character." "She's skin and bones," someone else shouted. Another mother held up one of my photos. "This isn't discipline. It's abuse." Roy tried to grab the papers from Mrs. Harlan's hands, but she pulled back. "Don't you dare touch me," she said. For the first time, Mom stepped forward. Her voice shook, but she said, "It's all true. Every word. He's been doing this to her for months." The crowd erupted. Questions, accusations, murmurs of disgust. Roy's investors stepped away from him like he was toxic. 2 security guards from the event came over and told him to leave. "No, no, this is my orchard," he yelled, but his voice cracked. No one listened. His perfect image was crumbling right in front of him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. As they escorted him off the grounds, I felt something inside me shift, like a lock turning in my chest. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one who had to stay silent. That night, after the festival, Roy stormed back to the house like a tornado. I stayed upstairs clutching my rabbit's cage, listening to his boots thud across the kitchen floor. "You embarrassed me," he yelled at Mom. "Do you know what you cost me? I could lose my contract." For the first time, she didn't apologize. Her voice was quiet but firm. "You did this to yourself, Roy. Everyone saw what you are." I crept halfway down the stairs and saw him pointing at her like he used to point at me. "You think you and that kid can just walk out on me? You don't have a dime without this farm." Mom's voice shook. "I'd rather have nothing than stay here." She called my Aunt Marlene, who lived 2 towns over, and told her everything, the ledger, the rules, the fines. Aunt Marlene arrived within the hour with her truck, and a woman she introduced as a legal advocate. "We're not leaving you here," she said, looking at me like I mattered. Roy tried to block the door. "This is my house. She's my kid now, and you can't take her." The advocate pulled out her phone and calmly said, "Do you want me to call the sheriff? Because I will. We've got witnesses, and those festival people are already talking." He froze. I'd never seen him back down before, but he did. He turned away, muttering, "Fine. Get out. You'll come crawling back when you're hungry." We packed fast. I only took my rabbit, a few clothes, and the notebook with all my photos and notes. As we drove away, I looked out the back window at the orchard, the trees just shadows under the night sky. I thought I'd feel scared, but mostly I felt lighter, like the air finally belonged to me. Aunt Marlene's cottage felt like stepping into a different world. My room had pale blue walls and a soft quilt, not the cold metal chair I'd been forced to sit in after meals. She even put a little table by the window for my rabbit. The next morning, I sat at her kitchen table, waiting for someone to shout about breakfast. Instead, Aunt Marlene set down a bowl of strawberries and a slice of toast. "Eat what you want, honey," she said. "No rules, no ledger." Mom started crying right there at the table. I think it hit her all at once. How bad it had gotten, how much she'd lost by staying silent. Within days, the local school sent someone to evaluate me. They gave Mom paperwork for an official autism diagnosis, and the counselor promised I'd get sensory-safe food options at lunch. It felt like someone had finally seen me, really seen me. Word spread quickly in the co-op community. Roy's buyers canceled their orders. People who used to shake his hand now crossed the street to avoid him. For the first time, I didn't care what happened to him. I was somewhere safe, and for once I believed it might stay that way. The first week at Aunt Marlene's, I started therapy. I sat in a quiet room with pale green walls and a soft rug, nothing like Roy's kitchen with its cold linoleum and ledger nailed to the wall. The therapist, Dr. Howard, asked me about food, about the ledger, about the way my stomach clenched at the sight of certain textures. I couldn't say much at first, but after a while the words just started spilling out, about the raw meat, about the fees, about my bike being locked in his barn like ransom. Dr. Howard nodded and took notes. "Claire," she said gently, "you're not broken. You have autism and sensory sensitivities, and what Roy did was abuse, not discipline." Hearing her say the word abuse made something deep in my chest loosen, like I'd been holding my breath for months. Mom sat through the sessions with me at first. Sometimes she cried more than I did. She told Dr. Howard how she'd felt trapped, how Roy used money as a weapon. For the first time, I saw her look at me like she owed me the truth. "I should have protected you," she whispered one night in the car, gripping the steering wheel. "But I promise, I'll never let anyone hurt you like that again." Dr. Howard recommended that we get everything documented, my weight loss records, my statements, even the photos I'd taken for the presentation. She said these things could be evidence. Aunt Marlene agreed and set up a meeting with a legal advocate. Meanwhile, I started drawing. At first, I didn't know why, just scribbles of bowls, scales, and giant spoons that looked like weapons. Then the drawings became more detailed. One day I sketched Roy's ledger, but instead of numbers, I wrote words like fear, shame, silence. Mom found me at the table, bent over my notebook. "This is powerful, Claire," she said softly. "Maybe you could share it." We picked one of the drawings, a plate with a single bite chain to it, and I painted it with watercolors. I called it Price Per Bite. Aunt Marlene loved it and suggested we donate it to a local fundraiser. They displayed it on an easel with my name, and someone even bid money on it. Life at the cottage started to feel like something real, something I could trust. Mom found a job managing a stall at the local farmer's market. She looked lighter, like she could finally breathe. That's where she met Daniel, a beekeeper who brought jars of golden honey every Saturday. He was kind and quiet, the opposite of Roy. Sometimes he'd bring me honey sticks and say, "These are for the bravest girl I know." Roy didn't take our silence well. He started calling Mom's phone, leaving messages that swung between apologies and threats. "You think you can ruin me? "You'll come crawling back when you're broke," he snarled in one voicemail. We never called back. The advocate told us to save every message as evidence. At school, my art teacher saw price per byte and asked if she could showcase it at a student exhibition. "This tells a story," she said, her voice warm. "It's not just art. It's a voice." For the first time, I believed her. Roy didn't disappear quietly. Within weeks, he filed for custody, claiming Mom was turning me against him and that his meal training program was being misrepresented. He even showed up at the courthouse in a new suit, smiling like a man who thought charm could erase everything he'd done. The hearing was held in a small rural courtroom. I sat between Mom and Aunt Marlene, my hands twisting in my lap. Roy's lawyer tried to paint him as a strict but loving parent. "Mr. Whitaker simply believes in teaching responsibility through structured meals," the lawyer said, holding up Roy's ledger like it was a parenting manual. The judge raised an eyebrow. "This ledger," she said slowly, flipping through the pages, "charges a 12-year-old for vomiting?" Roy stood up confidently. "Discipline has a cost. Farm life isn't easy, nor is psychological abuse." The judge cut in, her tone sharp. Mom testified next. Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away from Roy. She described how he threatened to cut us off financially if she ever questioned his rules, how he used the ledger to control everything. "I was afraid," she said quietly, "but I'm more afraid of what he's done to my daughter." Then it was my turn. My knees shook as I walked to the witness stand. I opened my notebook, the same one I'd used for the festival presentation, and handed it to the judge. Inside were photos of the meals, the fines, and my artwork. "This is what dinner looked like," I said. If I didn't finish, he said I owed him money. Sometimes I pretended to eat just so I wouldn't have to pay. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of pages turning. Dr. Howard testified after me. She explained my autism diagnosis, my sensory sensitivities, and how Roy's punishments had caused severe trauma. "She was not a picky eater," Dr. Howard said firmly. "She was a child forced into a system that monetized her disability." Even my teacher spoke. Mrs. Callahan, my homeroom teacher, told the court how I'd been hiding in the library during lunch, trembling if anyone mentioned food. "She was wasting away," she said, her eyes glistening. Roy tried to interrupt, insisting it was all exaggeration. "She's dramatic. This is just kids today, soft and spoiled." But the judge wasn't buying it. After a long pause, she said, "Mr. Whitaker, this is not discipline. This is exploitation. You turn basic nourishment into a punishment, a profit system. It stops now." She ruled that Roy would have no custody and no visitation rights. He was ordered to pay back a portion of the inheritance funds he'd threatened to deduct from me. The ruling even called his methods an exploitative monetization of a child's disability, which Mom's advocate later said was unprecedented in our county. When it was over, Roy stormed out, muttering about ungrateful women and soft judges. I didn't care. I looked at Mom, and for the first time in a long while she smiled at me. Not a nervous smile, but a proud one. That day I realized the truth. His orchard wasn't the only thing that could harvest something. We had just harvested every lie he'd planted. 2 years later, life looks nothing like the orchard. I'm 14 now, taller, healthier, and not afraid to eat in front of people. I've even started a high school internship at an art therapy center. It feels strange at first, helping other kids talk about their pain when I'm still figuring out my own, but when I show them how I once painted my feelings, they listen. Some even ask, "Can I try that?" And I tell them yes, because I know what it's like to have no voice until someone hands you a brush. Price per byte. The watercolor I made after leaving Roy's house has traveled farther than I ever imagined. Last month, a donor purchased it at a fundraiser and donated it to a clinic that works with parents of autistic children. "Your art is teaching people how to listen," Dr. Howard told me, and I almost cried. Mom has changed too. She runs a busy farmer's market stall now, selling produce and local honey with Daniel, the beekeeper who treats us like we're worth something. He never raises his voice, never makes me feel small. Sometimes he leaves notes in Mom's lunch bag, the kind of small kindnesses I never saw in Roy's house. The biggest change came last weekend, Mom and Daniel's wedding. It was held in a field full of sunflowers, the kind of place that feels like summer even in the fall. I wore a pale yellow dress and carried my sketchbook, just in case I wanted to capture the day. When they exchanged vows, I saw Mom's hands tremble, but not from fear, from happiness. At the reception, I stood near the dessert table, breathing in the smell of fresh pie without panic. There was no ledger, no watchful eyes forcing me to swallow more than I could handle. I took a slice of apple pie, ate 2 bites, and left the rest without anyone shouting about the cost. That small freedom felt bigger than anything Roy could have imagined. I danced with Daniel to an old country song, my shoes scuffing the wooden floor. "You're safe now, kiddo," he whispered as we turned in a slow circle. I believed him. Later that night, I sat with Mom on a bench under the string lights. She held my hand and said, "We're never going back to the way it was. You gave me the courage to leave. You saved us both. I didn't know what to say, so I leaned my head on her shoulder. When I look back, I don't just think about the pain Roy caused. I think about the quiet strength I found in spite of him. My story isn't just about surviving. It's about turning that cruelty into something that helps others. And for the first time, I feel like I'm more than what I endured. I'm building something new, something simple, and that's enough.